Welcome to the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. My name is David Wheatley. We're here to talk leadership in small, bite-sized and practical chunks. Enjoy. Well, welcome back to the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. And this is the second in our slightly longer episodes where I'm joined by Judy Brown and Rick Eigenbrod, who are both seasoned, is that a good way of putting it? Leadership consultants, organizational development consultants, and authors. And I encourage you to go to the previous episode where we talked about their books. And we were going to start with something we left off with last time a little bit, that all I want to talk about today is what's the value to a leader of networks?
You know, what got us, Rick and me, into a conversation about this actually is, Rick, I think you got asked, I'll tell part of the story, you can fill the rest in. You got asked to do a thing on networks. And Rick's, first of all, my reaction was, I don't like networking. The whole thing just sets my teeth on edge. And then Rick really overreacted. He made me look moderate with his reaction to the idea of networks. And I should say that he ended up leaning into that conversation. But a sidetrack about that, what I learned from watching him go through his reactions to this is this bit of wisdom of his, which is when we react that strongly to something, in this case, negatively to something you've been asked to do, it says way more about you than it does about the other who's asked you to do this or the other thing. So this exploration of what's going on with me that I reacted so strongly to this. So Rick, you want to wade into that part of the story?
Yeah, I'd gotten invited to talk to a group of senior execs around this. Actually, they were in what we used to call, do we still call it outplacement? Transition. They were in career transition mode. And my first reaction was very strong. I mean, because I think what I referenced was LinkedIn, Facebook, monster.com, all the technological instruments for what we call networking. And I noticed my reaction to it and got, again, curious and started thinking about how I think about networks and how we think about networks. We reference this kind of C-level work that Senge talks about, which is thinking about how we think about things, our deep assumptions. And I actually started having some fun with it, thinking about how I think about networks. And it just started to flow. It very much followed what happens when Judy and I have our conversation. In this case, I was having it with myself. And then Judy, you and I had a conversation about networks and how we feel about it, how we think about it. So that was the entree into it. So this is really about thinking about how we think about networks.
Well, and I remember one of the things it raised is that I realized in my own life that I have, so much of what has happened in my life has happened as the result of the unexpected that comes from networks that have grown up over time in my personal and professional life. And yet and how grateful I am for that, and how unexpected the gifts of that network have been for me. And this question of what's our own role in those networks. And I think the more traditional way of thinking about networks says we utilize our networks when we need something. You know, if David's on my network, which he has been for at least 2 decades, when I need something, I would call David up and say, David, I need something. Can you know, but what is much more likely to happen is David is likely to call me out of the blue about something, to chat about something, or because he's generously handed out my poem Fire to a group of executives and wants to talk with me about it, or whatever it is. And out of that flows all kinds of things, including the three of us in conversation. So this notion that a network, I think the reason I objected to it, so it's so instrumental. It's like using people for something. And indeed, at its greatest power, it has been such of a, my friend Michael Jones would have called it a gift economy. It is a gift economy where we tend to the links among us, and out of that come unexpected bounty that we wouldn't have been smart enough to even ask for. But evolves out of, and I guess I'd call it honest, authentic, heartfelt connections with other people that have developed over these many years and seasons and bits of work. And so once the conversation sort of fell into that space, then it was a really interesting conversation, because the conversation becomes what's my role in nurturing the networks that already exist? And that is a very interesting question.
I'll give away a secret, Judy, that I have a list of about 60 people that I try and connect with every 6 months, and you're on that list. And
Wow.
And so it pops up every 6 months on my calendar that I have to connect with them. And usually one of them is around June the 4th for no apparent reason.
Yeah.
And so you and I connect on that one. But, if I go back
Will
about...
you explain why June 4th we
No.
connect?
No, so we'll let
We have
people
a
guess.
shared birthday.
About 12 years ago, I found myself with a bunch of very new, relatively young CEOs who kept wanting to buy me coffee in exchange for free coaching. And so being an efficient person, I found, let's just group them all together on a Friday morning once a month, and we'll have what I call a round table instead. And I might be able to help, but then all these other people might be able to help. And they're from a very diverse group of industries, and they've since gone on to different roles and different functions. But is that what we're talking about? I call it, just for Rick, my poor man's Vistage. That I know you're a Vistage guy.
Yeah.
And I found that there's a couple of those that I've created since that have continued to grow. They're still going. Once a month we meet, and now we're meeting on Zoom, and they're just useful to people, whether it's to complain about what Kellogg's is doing in Battle Creek, which is one of them, or just to get some help on their leadership issues.
Yeah, there's a phrase. For a number of years, I worked in the Silicon Valley office at the time a publicly traded global outplacement career consulting firm with an organization development arm, and I would move back and forth between the two. And one of the founders had decided he didn't want to run the whole thing; he wanted to live in California. So we had a grand time with this. But one of the phrases you would hear over and over and over from people who were in some kind of transition was the phrase, "I have to activate my network." And in thinking about this, what I realize is, I think you got that wrong. Your network is already active. It's you that's not active. It goes on. It will think about you, or it won't think about you. It will think what it wants to think about you. But the notion that somehow a network, as Judy said, I want to really strongly agree with that notion that we think of it as instrumental, and we call on it when we need something from it. So it sets up this whole thing almost like an economy. And that this notion of it's at our service. We don't have a network alone. It has us. And it will do with us kind of what it pleases. And so that really changed it for me. It was a fundamental change in this notion about how I am or am not active in a network that is already alive and well and active on my part. And if I could put a line to what you said, Judy, it's this notion that the value of connection is connection.
Yes.
You know, the value of connection is connection. It's intrinsic that in this day and age, when there's such fragmentation, the notion that we are connected is a huge comfort. And so a consciousness, what are the questions? What is your consciousness about your network? Do you carry around that consciousness?
So it's kind of like, are you maintaining it? Have you got it on a maintenance schedule?
What an organized way to think about it, Dave.
Yeah.
Or maybe another way to think about it is the spider web, where they're all have you got it in mind, even if you don't necessarily have an organized way of connecting with it? Is it in your awareness all the time? So that other than our joint birthday that you and I share, which is the reason in June, in early June, there's a reason to connect. What are other reminders, I guess, is what I would say. What are other like little lightning bugs of energy that remind me that I want to reach out to one person or another?
Yeah.
And for me, sometimes it's what I'm seeing, reading. It's a poem I happen across, and I think this is something I want to share with so-and-so. And in some cases, there's no way of knowing what use they'll make of it. It's simply a felt sense that across whatever distance, this might be of value. That person might pass it to somebody else. They might pass it to somebody else. And the fifth person, it might make a big difference to.
So does that go to, because what Rick was saying, one of you was saying, sometimes we feel guilty about tapping into it because we don't know ask the question. But I wonder if that guilt comes from the fact that I haven't maintained it. And that maintenance is the generosity that what you're talking about, Judy, that is just sufficiently in mind that when I see something, I send it to you. And,
yes.
and then when I do call and say, hey, I need some help with this, it just feels like that's a natural continuation of the conversation.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
What if that was the mechanism, David, that the mechanism for enriching, enhancing, contributing to networks is what we give to it? That at the heart of our relationship to the network is generosity. It's not instrumental. I mean, there's nothing worse. My wife heard me say once, I was on a call and somebody said, gee, I tried to find you, but I couldn't. You don't have a website. You're not on Facebook. You're not on this, that, and the other. How come? And before I could stop my mouth, I said, well, if I was, then they'd find me. and I thought about that, and I realized it is some part of me has a sense about those things. And certainly I've had this experience in my wife when she was the managing principal of the Silicon Valley office and was on that. It was always people calling to ask for something, you're overwhelmed by it, by the asking. When I want to feel like I'm a part of connection.
Mm-hmm.
Work and life are too hard to go through alone. Don't do that. That I walk around with a sense about I'm connected. And you know certainly what satisfies a need is what we take from it. What we take. What satisfies our soul, forgive the phrase, is what we give to it. It's so satisfying to be generous in the network. And so as leaders, I think we are so steeped in our needs, so overwhelmed by the demands on us, that we don't really have space to step back and think, I'd like to reach out and contribute something. I want to give something. And so this notion about a network isn't instrumental It's not something you take from, it's not a tool. It's a way of living and thinking and being, to feel connected.
So, and the other term I've heard referred in this kind of way before, and we've used as well, is your personal board of directors. And the idea that, you know, a company has a board of directors to keep you on the right track and hold you accountable and to give you information on certain things. That and one of the things we encourage the executive MBA students at the Great Michigan State University, I know I'll get a round of applause for that one, go green, but the is to start building their personal board of directors if they haven't already got it, because many of them will find that they're in that cohort of classmates that, but the person you call because you've got a finance issue and you just want to throw it by them. But I think one of the things that Rick and Judy are both raising is that if I wait until I've got the finance issue to call them, then that's too late. It's the, what can I be giving them, or what's making me think of them, that I'm saying, oh, I just read this and I know you're going through this. I thought this might be useful. That's what the network is really about. Build it, and then when you need it, it'll be there.
The story that there's a Native American notion about Spider Woman that for me has been guiding about the idea of networks. And the idea of Spider Woman is that, as many of us know who come out the next morning with spider webs all over, you know, and we have to sweep them away. Spider Woman stays up all night reweaving the webs that the world during the day tears apart. And I think how our lives during the day have a tendency to tear things apart with the busyness, with the demands on us, with whatever. And the question it raises for me is, to what extent does our maintaining our webs have, our networks have this restorative power, not only for us, but for the network itself? And I bumped into a bit of odd research the other day that said that if you spin steel to the fine tensile size of spider web, that the spider web is stronger than the steel is at that size. And so this question for me is how to understand the strength of that web, but to understand that life tends to rip it apart, our lives, other people's lives. And we're in the business of playing the role of reweaving it.
I think the First Nation people, and going back in history, they used to actually use spiders' webs to bond wounds together because they were sticky and then would do that. And you know, you're raising a good question about that networks and the spinning, and it changes. How transitional is the network? I mean, they talk about friends being a reason, a season, or a lifetime. Are we talking the same thing for a leader's network?
Say a little bit more about that, David.
Well, building on what Judy said, that you know, other friends or there are people in the network that come in for a period of time. You know, while I'm doing my executive MBA, this person has really been helpful to my network, and then they move to Sacramento, and I've not seen them, and it's harder to keep in touch with them versus those people like I went to high school with them, and I kept in touch with them for all of my life. I wonder if there's a variety, a kind of a scale of those kind of people. And just to build on the example I shared earlier, Judy's on my top 60 list, but I also have another list that gets heavily disguised email blasted every so often. And what we try to do is to be content marketing. So I'm only blasting this because I think there's something you might be interested in. And so the secondary piece is marketing, but trying to maintain those different levels of network and working out where people fit in those networks, and they could be transitory.
Yeah, I think if you look at, if you make the invisible visible, it's this notion we've talked about before, and you literally mapped your network, right? With a sociogram, if you will. Yeah, there's going to be, you can map how distant they are from you, and distant defined in a number of ways. What's the nature of the intimacy? Here's one. What if you did a sociogram, a network, and that what you were mapping is around this concept. They see me.
So explore that a little bit more. What's that look like in your mind, Rick?
Well, it looks like Judy's really close to me in terms of the node. You know, this notion of being seen, very powerful. They get me, if you will. They know me, if you will. What if I map that out? What would it look like? Would I have lots of people very close to me who see me, who really get me? You know, who are they? How many are they? So I think we can look at networks in very different ways, you know, along certain different variables. One of the things that I'm aware of is how easy it is, in terms of what you just said, David, even at a distance, how easy it is to strengthen a bond. Judy and I, we're all Michigan, I think we're Michigan Staters, right? One of my good friends, a friend is at Michigan and his wife's at Michigan, and they just won the Big Ten championship. And I haven't had contact with him in probably 3-4 years. I just sent him a little note. It's about time. Congratulations. And he sends me back this wonderful note. You know, he used to always, when I'd call him, he'd go, Eigenbrod, you know, like that. And I could hear his voice. How much time did it take me to let him know I see him?
So that can get to, I think about people that I joined the police with, that some of them, if we get back together and we haven't seen each other for 10 years, it feels like we just left off.
Yes.
And they're those people who know you and see you. And part of that experience is we went through boot camp together, for want of a better term. And so if you go through boot camp together, you have a different experience that, you know, you manage through this storm together. And I hear that a lot with the Band of Brothers, military-esque type perspective, is that those brothers last a lifetime and you do what you want for them. And I think that for a leader, without that experience, there's a variety of nodes that are there. What can they do to strengthen those nodes and to make those, to help people see them?
Be generous.
So it comes back to what Judy was saying, is that
it does. It's like, again, so much of what a leader's attention is drawn to is, how do I get X done? And it's also, this isn't a word, but it's in time. You know, it's JIT. I'm going to reach out to my colleague who's running the operation in EMEA because we got this issue. So I think, you know, again, it comes back to, we talked about what's part of high value contribution of leaders. One of the high value contribution of leaders to be connected, to have a rich, to be a rich node, be connected to rich nodes. One of the joys I have in connecting people who are connected to me. And one of the rules I have is, if I'm going to connect somebody, I only do it if I feel like I'm doing both parties a favor. So the notion of a leader taking on and having a consciousness about the power of connection and how they can stay connected by being generous. I mean, think about what it would be for leaders who are all working at, you know, at Max, at Redline, to have colleagues call and just go, hey, how you doing? What's going on? You know, or I heard you were doing this. Are you aware of that? It may be helpful for you to know. Think of the power of that as creating this underlying glue that stays despite the chaos that goes on at the next level up.
You know, I was thinking that, as David, when you asked this question about people coming and going out of the network, what came to mind is from Leland School. I went to school for 13 years. The couple of people from kindergarten on that absolutely see me, not the whole class, but to the thing that Rick said. There's something about people who get us. And I want to say get us beyond our current role and whatever glory that brings to us, whatever importance that carries because of our leadership, but see us and continue to see us over time as we evolve, and can point to things along the line that they see that we have let them into in terms of who we're becoming in our own evolution. There is a kind of comfort in that, because it's not attached to any one place we are in our life. And having said that about my kindergarten pals from Leland Kindergarten, what I also want to say is there's the potential for, at this stage in our life, whatever the stage is, David, bumping into somebody that sees us. And I think that's the experience Rick and I have had, having bumped into each other because our colleague threw us into a small group in a leadership development program, and there we were. So in terms of length of time span, any possibility. But what strikes me is that there's something about a certain kind of clarity and completeness, being seen as a whole human being, that is part of, I don't know what I'd say, it's the most profound of the nodes on the network for me. And the willingness to see us as we evolve and grow, not say, oh, I thought you were doing this and that was really interesting to me, and now you're doing that, and why would you do that? There's the willingness to travel with us.
So
I was going to say those are the most important ones to me.
So you're talking about, having abundance mentality when it comes to generosity, and also be vulnerable enough to let people in.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm struck, Judy, by what you said. Something else came to mind. This is the fun we have. It's like we never know where these conversations are going to go. It's going to jump in our mind. What you said triggered two things. We think about we have our way with the network, and we do to some extent. But we have example after example after example of where the network has its way with us.
That's right.
And it dawns on me that the network and the richness of it is a source of emergence. Mm-hmm. We're here today because of the network, and out of the network emerged this conversation. And I think back on my life, and I think the last time I had a plan was, my plan took me up to graduating, getting my graduate degree in my first job. After that, I've used this phrase, my life wasn't in my plan. That so much of what honestly is a part of my life emerged from the network. It had its way with me. I was seen. People not only saw something in me that I might not have seen, they saw something for me that I never would have known about. So that if we think about this notion about where does emergence come from in our relationships, it comes from the richness of our connections. Let's use connections.
So then if we're saying that that's critical to leadership, how much time should leaders be investing in that?
More. More. And what strikes me, David, I was so struck by what you said, and that is that you've calendared this matter of having these conversations, touching base with somebody. And
because if I don't do that, I'll forget.
Right. And I think, Rick and I have gotten on this pattern of pretty much every Friday having a conversation. And so that's become a part of my sort of way of thinking about what it's actually become is spaciousness in my Friday. If it were not for this, my Friday would be jammed with calendar events as it is the rest of the week. And so in a sense, being disciplined about maintaining the network is a discipline of creating spaciousness for conversation in our lives.
Which links back to what we talked about last time a little bit, so that we have to find the space to do a couple of things. One is to think, and the other one is to connect.
Right. And the connection creates the capacity for thinking partners and thinking together, but in directions we never would expect. Never would expect. I mean, we ended up in this conversation about networks because it's so reactive to having been asked to do something on networks. And here we are together. And here we are together.
Which is, I go back to the formal version, and beyond my CEO one, I also have a credit union. All the credit unions that work with me, their CEOs get invited to another roundtable that is quarterly for half a day. And what I found from that in the last 10 years is that they reach out to each other outside of that significantly for advice and help. And then I link to, I've got a number of clients, and I know Rick has as well, in Vistage. And one of the things Vistage does is create a forced network and a disciplined connection.
Yeah.
So, and hopefully some of that generosity and vulnerability at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking about this notion about what if the leader, we're talking about leaders, and again, I really like the notion of using language like connection, which really is the heart of it, what a network is. What if a leader walked through the world with this thought in mind? I'm going to make every interaction, I'm going to create some value for the other person in every reaction, every interaction I have. No matter what it is, no matter where it starts, I'm going to leave value behind. That's where the bond comes from. Again, it goes back to, it's what you give it. It's not just what you take from it. And it's some way, it's so easy if you have a certain mindset about
it. It is. It comes back to that abundance mentality, doesn't it?
Yes, it really does.
I'll put it out there and it will come back to pay itself off potentially at some point. But if it doesn't, then it doesn't matter. I'm doing my investment in this network.
Right. I'm putting my gifts into it, and it may come back to me, it may not. It may get passed on to 2 or 3 other people. I may never know. It doesn't matter. There's just it's the native notion of a gift economy, which is so different from our own notion of how an economy works, which is instrumental. It's consumer. And this is in some ways, it's an indigenous idea of networks at work.
I think the 3 of us, and I'm sure many leaders, have a sense about, I know I'm clear and clear about this, I want to make a difference with people who make a difference. Right? It's not just enough I want to make a contribution in the moment, but what really satisfies is the sense of somehow there's a knock-on effect. I'll give you one of the loveliest compliments I ever got, and Judy knows about this one. I was working with this CEO, and we had our regular meeting, and he said, "Oh, by the way, we hadn't talked in a while," and he said, "Oh, by the way, my wife says to tell you she misses you." And I said, "I've never met your wife." And he said, "Yeah, I know." He's different at home because when we work together, when he and I work together, and this isn't about what I do, it's about what he does, he becomes different. And when he goes home, he's different. And this lovely notion of make a difference with people who make a difference, even in that little that lovely little thing my wife says to tell you she misses you. We've never met. And I think the vehicle for that, of making a difference with people who make a difference and having a knock-on effect of whatever contribution we make, goes through a network.
And there's a part of that, Rick, that I would want to edit in the following way. And I'd like to add to the make a difference with people who make a difference. And I can't have a clue who really will make a difference. That's the sentence
That's nice, Judy.
on it afterwards, which is we may have some sense of who will make a difference with whatever we pass on. But I'm going to say it's a rough approximation. You know, it's just a rough approximation. We don't know for sure. Who knows? Huh? So what of the people who've invested in us, who knows what they saw? You know, who knows?
So what we've been talking about.
I love that refinement. Thank you.
What we've been talking about for the last 40 minutes then has been the value of a leader nurturing their network in a way that is generous and giving, so that then that network is potentially fruitful back in return as and when it might need to be, but without the expectation.
That would be it.
Judy, closing thoughts?
The energy of life is in the threads of the networks. That'd be my closing thought.
Can you top that, Rick?
No.
We seem to have a theme to the way we finish. So Judy Brown, Rick Eigenbrod, thank you very much once again for joining us here. And we look forward to having you back maybe in a few weeks to have another, to listen in on another of your Friday afternoon conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
That was the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. My name's David Wheatley. For further information about Humanergy, go to humanergy.com or check out our latest book, What Great Teams Do Great, from all good bookstores. Have a good one. Stay healthy.